This is a blog for Friday the 19th of September, Urban. To start the lesson off, we got into groups and started looking at our learning points from last week. One of the things I learnt last week was that MC Hammer created the Running Man and Janet Jackson performed it on one of her tours. So yeah, that's where it started, coming from MC Hammer. Which I'll post some more information about things I've learnt underneath. After this, we then went into the theatre and we looked at health and safety inside and outside the dance studio. We looked at some things that could stop us from dancing, which is like hazards in the way, not suitable clothing, like wearing unsupportive shoes for an urban class, like platforms or something, or boots because they don't support your feet, and not suitable surroundings, like no springboard floors, so then you could get shin splints, and I'll post this underneath to support my evidence. And then after this we went into the theatre and then we started to look at some things that could be of risk to us in the theatre. And we took photographs of the things that we found that could be hazardous to us or people around us. So we took pictures, which I'll post all my pictures underneath. And one of the things I found that was a hazard was the ballet bars. Now the people at risk would be essentially the performers and the stage crew. The performers could trip and bump into the ballet bars as they're quite big and the metal, so if you stub your toe or you accidentally run into it, it's going to be extremely painful. You could easily break your toe on it. The crew could get hurt by moving it and not lifting correctly, by lifting with the backs and not with the legs to move the ballet bars around. Or if they're like at the side of the stage, the crew could bump into them there, or even performers could bump into them there. Audience wouldn't essentially be at risk there because audience wouldn't be going on stage or backstage, so they wouldn't be at risk for the ballet bars. It could be prevented by removing the ballet bars completely from the space, and putting them into somewhere that's not, putting them into a room that's not being used, or putting them to behind the theatre where no audience members go. So they'd be out of sight and they wouldn't be in reach of people tripping over them, etc. Another risk would be the hanging mics that are in the theatre that are used for acting shows. Now, the people at risk essentially would be the performers on stage, either if they were doing some lifting work or they were doing some jumps or leaps, because if you were to lift someone and they were to bang their head on the mic, that mic could hit them in the eye and potentially pose a risk to that performer and essentially hurt them in the eye. It wouldn't be a drastic injury, as the mics are quite small and they're quite light, but it would still hurt if that hit you in the eye. It could be prevented by lifting the mics higher so that no one would be at risk of hitting themselves or jumping to be hit in the face with it. And that's it for that. Another hazard I found were the big black speakers that are at the side of the stage. People at risk of this are performance and crew members, stage crew, because the speakers are really big. They're in the way and you can bump into them as they stick out, as they're not like exactly flat, they're quite big. So if you bump into them and you stub your toe, you could easily break your toe on them because they're that big. If the speakers are being used, they could damage hearing because they're really big speakers. So if the person to last use them has had the music really loud and you've not known this, you could turn them on and they could essentially damage your hearing because they're that big, so they're obviously going to be loud. Crew members could be at risk of these as well, because if they're moving them and they don't lift correctly, they're really going to put their back out and that's going to hurt a lot. It can be prevented by moving the speakers to a location which is safe so that they won't cause a trip hazard, or they won't be in the way, so they could be put someplace where they're cornered off and there's like hazard tape around so you know that they're there. The volume could be turned down on the control panel after each use so that no one's hearing would be affected. Another hazard I found were materials that were just lying around in the theatre. The people at risk of this are the performance and crew members. The performers, because some pieces of material that are left around aren't like seen straight away. The piece of material that I found is black and the walls in the studio, the theatre, are black, so they blend in, and it's a piece of metal. If a person moves their arm and cuts themselves, that's going to hurt. The edges are sharp. And then the crew members are at risk as well, because they're handling materials in a performance space. If they don't clean up after themselves, they can hurt themselves as well. It can be prevented by moving the materials out of the way or cleaning up after themselves so that they're not in the way of any performers using that theatre. And another hazard I found were wires that weren't strapped down. There's some wires near the stage left side, near the entrance door, near the entrance curtain, should I say, backstage. There's some wires hanging loose there, and they're really long, and it's so easy to get caught up in. I tripped up on them myself a few times. So the performers and the crew members are at risk of this, because you're moving on stage, off stage, side of stage. So the performers and the crew are at risk of that. It could be prevented through moving the wires and tucking them away and securing them down to the wall so that they're not going to hurt anyone by catching anyone on the wires. And after we did this, we went back into the studio and looked at some simple breakdancing movements. We had Cody teaching us this. And what we learnt was top rock, side rock, back rock, and a 6-step. And I quite enjoyed this because I've always wanted to know how to break dance. I've never break danced before in my entire life, and I've always wanted to know how to do like a top rock. So when doing the top rock, side rock, and back rock, I found this quite easy. And I got to grips with it quite quickly. Top rock, side rock, and back rock is a series of movements through your feet. So you'll like kick your right leg forward, step your leg to the side, bring it back, and then kick your left and then right. So it's like a free flowing movement, and it's quite bouncy and energetic, and it's really good when you get into it and you feel really like you've accomplished something, and it's quite fun to do. Now we moved on to a 6-step. I couldn't do a 6-step at all. I just found it so confusing and too difficult and too fast. A 6-step is where you move yourself round to go into a series of floor movement to break dancing on the floor. I couldn't even manage to do one. There was some people that just kept going and going, but I couldn't do that. So that's a learning point that I need to practice my 6 steps, and because it requires a lot of arm strength and core strength, I need to focus on my core and arm strength. So by doing this, it gave us a little insight to breakdancing, like the basics, the foundations, what we will need to use. It was quite challenging for me because I've never done breakdancing before, and it was quite new and different, so I really enjoyed it. My strength of the session was I was able to execute top rock, side rock, and back rock, and I had fun doing this and put personality into it. My weakness was that I wasn't able to execute a 6-step. My target is to work on my core strength and arm strength to be able to execute a 6-step, and to practice Hollaback Girl so that I am prepared for next session and there's not much time wasted on recapping. And that concludes this vlog.